Case 1, Christerson Lee, October 2006. Salem, Massachusetts. Salem, Massachusetts is a city layered in history. Tourists visit every autumn to walk its cobblestone streets, admire its colonial architecture, and explore the legacy of one of America's most infamous historical events. It is a place that has long associated itself with wrongful judgment, with the idea that appearances can be deeply deceiving. And in October of 2006, a story began to unfold in the quiet neighborhoods of that very city. That would eventually force an entire community, a team of doctors, a jury of 12, and the highest court in the state of Massachusetts to ask a question so painful it almost defied comprehension. How could a mother watch her child suffer and choose to do nothing? Jeremy Fraser was 6 years old when his world changed forever. He was a bright-eyed little boy with profound autism, non-verbal, developmentally delayed, and entirely dependent on the one person who was supposed to protect him above all others. His mother, Christerson Lee. Jeremy could not speak for himself. He could not call for help. He could not tell a teacher, a neighbor, or a doctor what was happening inside the walls of his home. And perhaps that is precisely why what happened next was able to go on for as long as it did. In the autumn of 2006, Jeremy was brought to Massachusetts General Hospital, one of the most respected medical institutions in the country, where doctors delivered a diagnosis that was both devastating and in many ways hopeful. Jeremy had been diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, a form of cancer that, while serious, was considered highly treatable. The oncology team was cautious but encouraging. They told Kristen Labrie that with the right treatment plan, Jeremy had an 85 to 90% chance of making a full recovery. 85 to 90%. Those are extraordinary odds. Those are the kinds of numbers that families hold on to with both hands. Those are the numbers that fuel hope. And for a time, hope seemed justified. Jeremy underwent intensive inpatient chemotherapy at the hospital. The large doses of medication did their job. The cancer responded. The cancer went into remission. Doctors were encouraged. They transitioned Jeremy to an outpatient treatment plan, which meant that the next phase of his care would continue at home. Kristen Lee was given detailed prescriptions. She was given clear instructions. She was given a road map to save her son's life. All she had to do was follow it. She did not follow it. What prosecutors would later describe in court was not a story of confusion or of a mother overwhelmed to the point of accident. What they described was a pattern, a deliberate, calculated, and sustained pattern of deception that stretched across months. Kristen Lee repeatedly failed to fill Jeremy's prescriptions at the pharmacy. She knew the medication needed to be picked up. She knew what it was for. And yet, time after time, she did not go. What made this particularly chilling was not simply the neglect itself. It was what happened alongside it. Kristen Lee continued to attend Jeremy's medical appointments. She continued to sit across from his doctors and answer their questions, and she lied. She told the medical team that Jeremy was receiving all of his medications at home. She told them everything was going according to plan. Assistant District Attorney Kate McDougall, who prosecuted the case with precision and moral clarity, told the court that Leary had not simply made mistakes. She had constructed an elaborate false reality that protected her own inaction while her son's cancer silently returned. At one point, when one of Jeremy's doctors called the pharmacy directly to follow up on the prescription, the pharmacy confirmed what investigators had long begun to suspect. The prescriptions had not been filled. When confronted, Leary told doctors that the pharmacy must have made an error. It was not an error. The only error, prosecutors argued, was placing Jeremy's life entirely in the hands of someone who had already decided, consciously or unconsciously, that she would not fight for it. By February of 2008, when Jeremy's medical team finally uncovered the full extent of what had been happening, it was too late for the treatment that had once offered so much promise. The cancer had returned. It had transformed. What had been a treatable form of lymphoma had now progressed into leukemia, a form that was no longer responsive to the chemotherapy that could have saved him had it been administered as prescribed. In 2009, Jeremy Fraser passed away. He was 9 years old. The investigation that followed was careful and thorough. Prosecutors built their case on pharmacy records, medical documentation, and the testimony of the doctors and nurses who had cared for Jeremy. When Kristen Lee eventually took the stand, she offered what would become a defining moment in the trial. She gave 3 separate shifting explanations for her behavior. She said she had been overwhelmed. She said she believed Jeremy had already been cured. She said the medication was making him sicker and she couldn't bear to watch him suffer. Prosecutors argued that this inconsistency was not the testimony of a grieving, confused mother. It was the testimony of someone who had never settled on a story because the truth was something she could not say out loud. In April of 2011, after a jury heard all of the evidence presented in Lawrence Superior Court, Kristen Lee was found guilty of attempted murder, assault and battery on a disabled person, assault and battery on a child, causing substantial injury, and reckless child endangerment. As the verdict was read, she wept. She leaned toward her family seated in the front row of the courtroom and whispered to her younger sister. Court officers placed her in custody. On April 15, 2011, she was sentenced to 8 to 10 years in state prison, followed by 5 years of probation. The prosecution had sought 16 years. Her defense had hoped for 1. The judge settled on something in between, a sentence that reflected both the gravity of what had occurred and the complex layered circumstances surrounding it. The case did not end there. In 2016, the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court granted Labries a new trial, ruling that her original defense attorney had been ineffective, specifically because he had failed to retain a pediatric cancer expert who could have testified that medication noncompliance among caregivers of seriously ill children is not uncommon and does not always reflect malicious intent.
Lee was released on bail, but the new trial never happened. On August 31st, 2016, Kristen Lee returned to court and entered a guilty plea to the charge of attempted murder in connection with Jeremy's death. The sentence, 5 years in state prison, was deemed served. She had already spent that time behind bars. She was 44 years old. She walked out of the courthouse, a free woman. District Attorney Jonathan Blahet spoke outside the courthouse that day. He said, "This case has always been about justice for Jeremy. It was our job to be his voice." Those words carried enormous weight because Jeremy Fraser had spent his short life without a voice of his own. He was a child who could not speak, could not advocate for himself, and could not tell anyone what was being taken from him. The only voice he ever had in a courtroom was the voice of the state, and the state ultimately made sure that voice was heard. The case of Kristen Lee remains one of the most complex and morally troubling child welfare cases in Massachusetts history. It raises profound questions not only about the actions of one individual, but about the systems designed to protect vulnerable children, the pharmacy check-ins, the social worker visits, the medical follow-ups that should have caught the signs sooner. In the aftermath of Jeremy's passing, the Massachusetts Department of Social Services undertook a review of its practices for monitoring medically vulnerable children in home care environments. Jeremy Fraser deserved to grow up. He deserved the 85 to 90% chance that medicine had given him. He deserved a mother who would fight for that chance with everything she had. The justice system gave him what it could: a verdict, a conviction, a guilty plea that acknowledged on the record that what happened to him was wrong. For families navigating the impossible weight of caring for a child with both autism and a serious illness, organizations like the Autism Society of America and the National Children's Cancer Society offer resources, support networks, and advocacy programs designed to ensure no family has to face that journey alone. If you know a family struggling with a medically complex child, please reach out and connect them with the help that is available. Jeremy Fraser was 9 years old. He loved his mother, and he never got to grow up. If this case moved you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Time. Your support helps us continue telling the stories of those who cannot tell them for themselves. But as heartbreaking as the story of Kristen Lee is, the next case shook an entire coastal community to its core and sparked a national conversation about a condition that millions of new mothers face in silence every single day. Case 2, Lynn C. Clancy, January 24, 2023. Dubbury, Massachusetts. There are towns along the South Shore of Massachusetts that feel almost insulated from the kind of tragedy that dominates news headlines. Dubbury is one of those towns. It sits quietly on the coast, its streets lined with colonial homes and mature trees, its residents deeply rooted in community life. It is the kind of place where neighbors know each other's names, where children ride bikes to school, and where the idea of violence seems as distant as a foreign country. And yet, on the evening of January 24, 2023, a 911 call came in from a house on Green Street that would change Dubbury forever and would force the entire nation to confront a medical crisis hiding in plain sight. Patrick Clancy had been a devoted husband and father. By all accounts, he and his wife Lindsay were a loving couple, the kind of family that neighbors described as picture-perfect. Lindsay Clancy was 32 years old, a labor and delivery nurse at Massachusetts General Hospital, a woman whose professional life was built around bringing new life into the world safely and compassionately. Colleagues described her as the nurse you would want in the room when the most important moment of your life arrived. Friends described her as someone who breathed and lived for her children. Lindsay and Patrick had 3 children together. 5-year-old Cora was their eldest, curious, bright, and full of the boundless energy that defines early childhood. 3-year-old Dawson was his mother's little companion, a boy who, according to those who knew the family, had the kind of laugh that filled every room he entered. And then there was Ken, 8 months old, newly arrived into the world. A baby boy who had barely had the chance to take in his surroundings before the world around him collapsed. Patrick Clancy had stepped out of the house that evening to run an errand to pick up dinner from a restaurant. It was a short trip, the kind of errand any parent makes a dozen times a week without a second thought. But prosecutors would later allege that this particular errand had been orchestrated. They alleged that Lindsay had used her phone's mapping application to calculate the driving distance to the restaurant, ensuring that the round trip would give her a precise window of time. They alleged that she had placed the pickup order in advance. They alleged that the errand had been designed. When Patrick returned home and found his wife, she was in the backyard, seriously injured. He called 911 immediately. Dispatchers heard him ask his wife what she had done. Her reply was devastating. She told him she had tried to end her own life by jumping from a second-floor window. Patrick asked where the children were. She told him they were downstairs. What Patrick Clancy found when he ran to his children is something that no parent should ever have to witness and something that no words can fully honor. All 3 of his children had been placed in the basement, each with exercise resistance bands around their necks. He untangled them one by one, begging each of them to breathe, his cries captured by the 911 dispatcher, who stayed on the line. Emergency responders arrived within minutes. All 4 members of the Clancy family were transported to hospital. Cora and Dawson did not survive. Baby Ken, critically injured, was rushed to Boston Children's Hospital and fought with everything his tiny body had. He too ultimately did not survive. Lindsay Clancy sustained injuries from her fall that left her paralyzed from the waist down. She would face the rest of her life unable to walk, a physical consequence that carried its own particular weight given what the prosecution and defense would spend the next months debating. The arraignment took place on February 7, 2023. Lindsay Clancy appeared via video link from her hospital bed, a surgical mask over her face, an image that was simultaneously heartbreaking and surreal. She was charged with multiple counts of murder, 3 counts of strangulation, and 3 counts of assault and battery with a dangerous weapon. Not guilty, pair were entered on her behalf. The courtroom and the watching public grappled with a question that had no easy answer. Who was Lindsay Clancy? The prosecution's position was clear. Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Sprague told the court that the evidence showed deliberate, premeditated action. She said that Dawson, at 3 years old, had shown signs of having struggled. Evidence. Prosecutors argued that Lindsay had time during the act itself to reconsider, to stop, to call for help, and did not. The prosecution noted that she had been evaluated by a psychiatrist just weeks earlier and told she showed no symptoms of postpartum depression. They pointed to the careful planning, the phone searches, the restaurant order, and the precision of the timeline. Their position was that this was not a woman out of touch with reality. It was a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. The defense's position was equally compelling and, for many observers, equally believable. Attorney Kevin Reddington told the court that his client had been suffering from a severe and catastrophically undertreated mental health crisis. He said she had been prescribed multiple psychiatric medications including Valium, Prozac, Klonopin, and Zoloft that rather than stabilizing her condition had destabilized it beyond recognition. He argued that she was suffering from postpartum psychosis, an acute and rare psychiatric condition that affects approximately 1 in 1,000 new mothers, causing hallucinations, breaks from reality, and in severe cases, actions that the person experiencing it cannot understand, control, or even consciously direct. The timeline of Lindsay Clancy's mental health treatment in the weeks before January 24th is both tragic and telling. At the end of December 2022, she told her husband she was having thoughts of harming herself and her children. He heard those words. He told police that on January 1st, Lindsay voluntarily admitted herself to McLean Hospital, one of the most respected psychiatric facilities in the country, affiliated with Harvard Medical School. She was discharged on January 5th, less than 3 weeks before the events of January 24th, with no indication that she posed a danger to herself or others. On January 23rd, she wrote in her phone that she was experiencing anxiety about returning to work after her maternity leave. The following day, 3 children were gone. The question of postpartum psychosis became the central medical and legal battleground of the case. Defense forensic psychologist Dr. Paul Zezel evaluated Lindsay Clancy and concluded that she had been experiencing a profound psychotic episode. The defense argued that she heard voices, specifically that she reported hearing a man's voice instructing her to act, and that this voice was the product of a psychosis so severe that it separated her from her own reality. The prosecution countered that this account only emerged after Lindsay had the opportunity to speak with the defense's psychologist and that she had never described voices or used the word psychosis to her husband before that conversation. Patrick Clancy, the man who lost 3 children, has been consistent and unwavering in his support for his wife. In a deeply moving interview with the New Yorker magazine, he said, "I wasn't married to a monster. I was married to someone who got sick." He has advocated publicly for greater awareness of postpartum mental health conditions, greater protections for families, and a healthcare system that listens more carefully when new mothers say they are not well. The Clancy case is, as of the time of this documentary, still working its way through the Massachusetts court system. Lindsay Clancy remains in a psychiatric facility awaiting trial on first-degree murder charges. The outcome of this case will likely shape how courts across the country approach postpartum psychosis as a legal defense for years to come. What the case has already done, regardless of its legal outcome, is open a desperately needed national conversation. Postpartum psychosis is real. It is documented. It is treatable. And it is not always caught in time. Organizations like Postpartum Support International offer free confidential resources for new and expecting mothers experiencing any form of perinatal mental health struggle. Their helpline is available to anyone who needs it, and their message is simple. You are not alone, and help is available. The children of Dubry, Cora, Dawson, and Kaylin Clancy were loved. They were cherished, and they deserve to grow up in the home that their parents built for them. The conversations their short lives sparked may ultimately save others. That is not a comfort, but it is something. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Time. Together, we keep these stories alive and remind the world that every victim deserves to be remembered. The next case takes us away from the suburbs and into a house that investigators described as one of the most disturbing scenes they had encountered in their careers. A place where the walls themselves seemed to hold unimaginable secrets. Case 3. Erica Murray. September 2014. Blackstone, Massachusetts. Blackstone is a small working-class town in Worcester County, Massachusetts, tucked along the Rhode Island border approximately 50 miles southwest of Boston. It is the kind of place where residents know their neighbors. where front porches are often occupied and where an unusual smell coming from the house down the street is. The kind of thing people notice but often dismiss. That is until the day they cannot dismiss it any longer. In September of 2014, a neighbor in Blackstone received a knock at the door. It was a child, a 10-year-old boy, who had come seeking help. Inside the house he had just come from. He told the neighbor there was a baby who would not stop crying and there were no adults around. The neighbor went to investigate. What she found caused her to call child welfare authorities immediately. The baby, a girl just a few months old, was lying on a bed in a state of extreme neglect. She was covered in filth. She appeared to have been unattended for an extended period of time. Child welfare workers arrived and found 4 living children in the home. The 10-year-old boy who had sought help, a 13-year-old girl, a 3-year-old girl, and the infant. The conditions inside the house were so severe that investigators later described them as some of the most disturbing they had ever encountered in their careers. The home was filled with layers of garbage, rotting debris, and material that could not be safely identified. The 3-year-old girl who was removed from the home was found to have a severely flattened head, consistent with a child who had spent almost the entirety of her young life lying on her back without being held, stimulated, or moved. She curled her legs into a fetal position when seated, a developmental regression that medical professionals associated with profound, prolonged neglect. When Massachusetts State Police troopers conducted a thorough search of the property, they made a discovery that would transform this case from a child welfare investigation into something far more serious. Inside 2-bedroom closets stored in cardboard boxes, they found the remains of 3 infants. 2 of the infants were partially clothed. The third still had its placenta attached. All 3 showed evidence of having been born in the home. None of them had ever been registered. None of them had ever been known to exist. The woman at the center of everything was Erica Murray, who was 30 years old at the time of her arrest. She had been living in the home with her partner, Raymond Rivera, who was the father of her children. Rivera's role in the household was described extensively during the investigation and trial. Prosecutors and experts painted a picture of a woman who had become psychologically isolated, cut off from her family, her support network, and ultimately her own sense of reality. Forensic psychologist Dr. Frank Decataldo conducted a battery of psychological testing on Murray and determined that she had significant cognitive limitations and a personality disorder that had been compounded by years of isolation, fear, and what was described as extensive emotional control by her partner. Murray, experts said, had lost the ability to perceive how badly things had deteriorated around her. That psychological portrait became central to the legal proceedings. Murray waived her right to a jury trial, placing the decision entirely in the hands of Worcester Superior Court Judge Janet Keenan Walker. Judge Keenan Walker presided over 8 days of testimony before announcing her verdicts in June of 2019, nearly 5 years after Murray's arrest. The judge found Murray not guilty of second-degree murder in connection with the infant remains, ruling that the prosecution had not proven beyond a reasonable doubt that the infants were born alive or that Murray's actions or inactions constituted criminal responsibility, given the profound impairment of her mental state. The judge described Murray as someone who had not been conscious of how dire conditions had become, whose cognitive deficits and history of victimization had produced what she called extremely primitive coping mechanisms. Murray was, however, found guilty of 2 counts of assault and battery causing substantial injury to the 2 children. The 3-year-old girl with the flattened head and the infant who had been left alone on the day the neighbor was called. She was also found guilty of 2 counts of cruelty to animals, as a cat and a dog had also been found living in the squalid conditions of the home. She was acquitted of reckless child endangerment. On July 11, 2019, Judge Keenan Walker sentenced Erica Murray to 6 to 8 years in state prison with credit for the nearly 5 years she had already served since her arrest in 2014. Murray would be eligible for parole within approximately a year of sentencing. The judge stated plainly at sentencing that she could not punish Murray for crimes of which she had not been convicted, including the presence of the infant remains, which remained one of the most haunting elements of the case. There is nothing about this case that is normal. The judge said all 4 living children were removed from the home and placed with the Massachusetts Department of Children and Families. They were given the medical attention, therapeutic support, and stability that they had been denied for so long. Their paths to healing were long and difficult, but they were paths, and that mattered enormously. The Blackstone case prompted significant public discussion about the intersection of mental health, cognitive disability, domestic control, and child welfare. It raised uncomfortable questions about the role of neighbors, schools, and social services in recognizing the signs of a household in crisis. Murray's children had been enrolled in school. The 10-year-old boy had teachers, classmates, and a daily life outside the house. How had no one noticed? How had the signs gone unseen for so long? There are no easy answers. But the case reinforced the critical importance of programs like the Darkness to Light Initiative and the Child Welfare Information Gateway, both of which provide training and resources to help communities identify and respond to signs of neglect and abuse before it reaches a crisis point. The 4 children who walked out of that house in Blackstone in September of 2014 deserved so much better. They deserved it from the very beginning. Their resilience and their survival is the most important part of this story. If this case has affected you, please like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Time. Your support means the world to us and to the families behind every story we tell. But what you just heard was a case defined by neglect and silence. The next case involves the deliberate premeditated taking of 2 young lives and a motive that investigators described as one of the most disturbing they had ever encountered. Case 4, Lataria Sanders, February 5, 2018. Brockton, Massachusetts. Brockton, Massachusetts is a city of roughly 100,000 people located approximately 25 miles south of Boston. It is a city with a proud history, a deep community spirit, and a resilience that its residents wear openly. It is also a city that on the morning of February 5, 2018, received news that left its community utterly speechless. At approximately 12 minutes past noon on that day, Brockton police received a 911 call reporting a medical emergency at an address on Prospect Street. Officers arrived to find Lataria Sanders standing outside the building, distraught and combative. She had to be physically restrained by emergency medical personnel at the scene. When officers entered the 3rd-floor apartment, they found exactly what no first responder is ever prepared to find. 8-year-old Edson Brewer, known to family and friends by his middle name, Marin, was in the apartment. His younger brother, 5-year-old Lassen Brewer, was also there. Both boys had been wrapped in bedding. Both boys had lost their lives. The medical examiner determined that each child had been subjected to multiple stab wounds. In total, between the 2 boys, investigators counted over 100 individual wounds. A kitchen knife was recovered from the sink. It was the murder weapon. What prosecutors described in the days, weeks, and months that followed was not a crime of sudden impulse or temporary breakdown, or at least not one they were prepared to accept as such. Sanders had cleaned the boys' bodies after the act. She had placed them in their beds. She had mopped the floors of the apartment, attempting to remove the evidence of what had occurred. She had then left the apartment, run to a neighbor's home, and collapsed, screaming and crying before emergency services arrived. When investigators spoke with Sanders in the aftermath of that morning, she initially told them that her husband and her 16-year-old daughter had committed the act. She then changed her account. She told detectives that the deaths had been the result of what she described as voodoo stuff, that the killings had been part of a ritualistic act. Prosecutors would present this explanation not as a defense, but as a window into the mental state and belief system of a woman who had, in the months leading up to February of 2018, undergone a profound and disturbing transformation. Court proceedings revealed that Sanders had become deeply obsessed with conspiratorial and occult ideologies in the 2 years preceding the crime. Her own mother, Earlene Sanders, spoke to investigators and described her daughter's descent with heartbreaking clarity. She told police that Lataria had begun watching videos online about the Illuminati and had become consumed by beliefs about rituals, sacrifices, and numerology. Earlene Sanders told police that just 2 days before the deaths of the boys, Latara had told her that she had come to hate her eldest son. She had spoken to her mother about sacrificing humans as a means of advancing in the world. Earlene Sanders had been alarmed, but she had not known what was coming. The family of Sanders, who had observed the deterioration of her mental state in the period before the crime, were vocal supporters of a mental illness defense. Throughout the legal proceedings, they maintained that the Latarcia Sanders, who entered that apartment on February 5th, was not the same woman they had known for years. Defense attorney Elliot Levine argued consistently that Sanders had been legally insane at the time of the killings, that her mental state had been so profoundly compromised that she could not have formed the criminal intent required for a first-degree murder conviction. But the prosecution built a counter-narrative grounded in evidence of deliberate and purposeful behavior. Investigators revealed in court proceedings that Sanders had opened a post office box in the weeks before the deaths of her sons. In preparation, prosecutors suggested for receiving fan mail after her story became public. She had written in a private journal about setting up a fundraising campaign to profit from what she described as a good story. These details painted a picture not of a woman lost entirely to psychosis, but of someone who had contemplated, calculated, and even anticipated the attention that would follow. The trial lasted 9 days. The jury deliberated for approximately 4 hours before returning their verdicts. In late December of 2022, Latia Sanders was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of witness intimidation. The following day, on December 28, 2022, she was sentenced in Plymouth Superior Court by Judge William Sullivan to 2 mandatory life terms without the possibility of parole to run concurrently, along with a sentence of 9 to 10 years for the witness intimidation conviction. Plymouth County District Attorney Timothy Cruz stood outside the courthouse and addressed the assembled media. He said, "These 2 young boys were innocent babies with their lives ahead of them." He thanked the investigators, the legal team, and above all, the family of Edson and La Sonuro, a family that had sat through 9 days of testimony about the worst morning of their lives, seeking the only thing they had any right to ask for: justice. The case of Latara Sanders is one that resists simple categorization. It sits at the complicated intersection of mental health, belief systems, legal responsibility, and the profound failure of the systems and relationships that should have intervened before February 5th arrived. Her own family knew she was in crisis. Her own mother had heard the words come out of her daughter's mouth, and yet no intervention came in time to save 2 little boys whose only crime was being born to the wrong mother at the wrong moment. In her unraveling, Edson Marlon Bruro and Lawson Berto were 8 and 5 years old. They deserved to grow up in the city their family called home. They deserved to play, to learn, to become. Their lives are remembered by a father, a community, and now by you. If this case moved you, please like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Time. We are committed to honoring every victim by making sure their stories are never forgotten. The next case may be the most famous on this entire list. A case that gripped not just Massachusetts, but the entire nation, built around the mystery of a little girl found alone on a Boston harbor island with no name and no known family. Case 5. Michelle Bond. June 25, 2015. Boston, Massachusetts. On the morning of June 25, 2015, a woman was walking her dog along the shoreline of Deer Island in Winthrop, Massachusetts, a narrow strip of land that juts into Boston Harbor, approximately 8 miles from downtown Boston. It was an ordinary morning walk, the kind that thousands of people take along the Massachusetts coastline every day, without incident. But on that particular morning, she found something that would launch one of the most public and emotionally gripping missing person investigations in the history of the state. Tucked inside a plastic bag near the shoreline was the partially decomposed body of a small child, a little girl. She was approximately 2 years old. She was dressed in polka-dot leggings and wrapped in a zebra print blanket. She had no identification. No one knew who she was. No one had reported her missing. For weeks and then months, she would be known only as Baby Doo. The Suffolk County District Attorney's Office under District Attorney Dan Conley moved swiftly and publicly. They commissioned a forensic artist to create a computer-generated composite image of the child based on her physical features. The image was released to the public and shared on social media on July 21, 2015. It was shared millions of times. It was on every television screen, every news website, every Facebook timeline across the country. The nation looked at that image and felt something primal and collective. A grief for a child no one knew, and a burning need to find out who she was and what had happened to her. More than 200 tips poured in. Investigators followed every lead. Weeks passed. Summer turned toward autumn. Still no identity. The break in the case came in September of 2015. Not from a scientific breakthrough, but from a conversation. A man named Michael Sprint Guy had been told something by a woman he knew. That woman was Rel Bond. And what she told him changed everything. Sprint's Guy went to police. He told them that Rel Bond had confided in him that the child in the composite image, Baby Dew, was her daughter, and she had told him what had happened to her. Rel Bond was a 35-year-old woman living in Dorchester, a neighborhood of Boston. She had a documented history of addiction and had struggled with heroin dependency for years. She had been arrested previously on multiple occasions. She had a daughter named Bella, not Amoroso Bond, born on August 9, 2012. Bella was 2 years old at the time of her death. Bella was the child on Deer Island. Bond had been living with a man named Michael McCarthy when Bella passed away. McCarthy had moved into her home in early 2015. The relationship between Bond and McCarthy was one that prosecutors described as defined by heroin addiction and, on McCarthy's part, a deep obsession with the occult. A friend testified that McCarthy had spoken of seeing Bella as something other than a child, as a supernatural entity to be feared. In the weeks before Bella's death, he had reportedly locked her in a closet as a form of discipline. He had spoken about her in terms that alarmed those around him. Michelle Bond testified at Michael McCarthy's trial that on the night Bella passed away, she had walked into her daughter's room and witnessed McCarthy physically assaulting the child with extreme force. She said she tried to intervene but was overpowered and threatened. She said she was injected with heroin by McCarthy shortly afterward and lost consciousness. When she woke, Bella was gone. McCarthy allegedly told her it was her time to die. She was a demon. Bond did not call the police that night. She did not call them the next day or the week after or in the months that followed. She continued to claim housing benefits in Bella's name as if Bella were still alive. She told people her daughter had been taken by the state's Department of Children and Families. She maintained the lie for months, while her daughter's body lay in a plastic bag on a harbor island. In exchange for her cooperation and testimony against McCarthy, prosecutors offered Michelle Bond a plea agreement. She pleaded guilty to charges including being an accessory after the fact to murder and was sentenced to time served followed by 2 years of probation. She had been incarcerated while awaiting trial and was released after McCarthy's conviction. Michael McCarthy was tried in Suffolk Superior Court in the late spring of 2017. The trial lasted approximately 3 weeks. Over 30 witnesses testified and 169 pieces of evidence were introduced. The jury deliberated for just over 23 hours across 5 days before returning their verdict on June 26, 2017. Michael McCarthy was found guilty of secondary murder. He was sentenced to life in prison with parole eligibility after 20 years. The defense maintained throughout the trial, and McCarthy himself has continued to maintain, that he did not cause Bella's death and that Rel Bond was the true perpetrator. McCarthy's attorney described Bond as a manipulative and unreliable witness whose testimony was shaped entirely by the incentive of her plea deal. The medical examiner was unable to determine a definitive cause of death, noting that the manner could have been consistent with either strangulation or a severe physical blow that caused cardiac arrest. The jury, however, found the evidence sufficient to convict. Bella Bond's father, Joseph Amoroso, spoke at McCarthy's sentencing. He described Bella as a happy and intelligent child, full of light. He had never been given the chance to meet his daughter. He had gone to Bond's apartment once, hoping to introduce himself, and Bond had told him Bella was at Cape Cod. By the time the truth emerged, There was only a shoreline, a plastic bag, and a composite image that the world had already seen. Bella Na Amoroso Bond was 2 years old. She had polka-dot leggings and a zebra print blanket. For 3 months, the entire country wanted to know who she was. She deserved so much more than the world gave her. If this story affected you, please like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Time. Each like and each subscription tells the algorithm to share these stories further, and that matters. The next case involves a mother from Salem, Massachusetts, not far from where our very first case took place. And a night of violence so extreme that even the first responders who arrived on scene struggled to process what they found. Case 6. Tanisha Goodwin, March 18, 2012. Salem, Massachusetts. Salem, Massachusetts appears twice in this documentary, and not by coincidence. It is a city that has witnessed more than its share of tragedy. A city where the history of catastrophic failure to protect the innocent runs deep. The events of March 18, 2012 added a chapter to that history that no one in the city's first responder community, its schools, its neighborhoods, or its child welfare offices would ever fully leave behind. Tanisha Goodwin was 25 years old in the spring of 2012. She was a mother of 2. Her son, Jamal, was 8 years old and a first grader at Witchcraft Heights Elementary School. Her daughter, Erica, was 3 years old. By all external appearances, Tanisha Goodwin was a young mother navigating the difficulties of single parenthood. Family members who knew her described her in better times as a loving and energetic presence. They also described a woman who had been struggling with serious mental health challenges for most of her life. The records told a difficult story. Tanisha Goodwin had been in the care of mental health services since she was approximately 8 or 9 years old. She had been diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, a condition that combines the symptoms of psychosis, including hallucinations and disordered thinking with mood disorder elements, similar to bipolar disorder. She had grown up in circumstances that were themselves marked by neglect and hardship. Her mother had passed away when Tanisha was 16 years old and pregnant with Jamal. A cousin, Wayne Cox, had taken both Tanisha and her younger brother into his home. Despite the challenges of her history, Tanisha had fought for custody of Jamal, going to probate court in 2010 and securing a legal order that brought her son back to live with her in Salem. She had her daughter Erica in her care. She had been connected with the Massachusetts Department of Children and Families, which had arranged daycare vouchers and a parenting support aid. Social workers had been in contact with Goodwin in the weeks and days leading up to March 18th. A neighbor had reportedly overheard Goodwin on a previous occasion, expressing deep frustration with the demands of parenting. On the day of the incident, prosecutors said she had called Erica's father and had a contentious conversation about child support. A school bus driver noted that on that morning, Goodwin had been slow to come down to meet her children at the bus stop, even though she was home. These were, in retrospect, the gathering clouds of a storm that nobody identified in time. On the evening of March 18, 2012, what took place inside the Salem Heights apartment was something that no one in the building, the neighborhood, or the city's emergency services was prepared for. Tanisha Goodwin approached her 8-year-old son Jamal from behind as he sat on his bedroom floor eating cereal and watching a film. Prosecutors said that she told her son he had lived too long. She then used a knife to inflict life-threatening injuries to his throat, nearly severing his trachea and cutting through major neck structures. She then went to 3-year-old Erica and inflicted similarly severe injuries to her daughter's neck. After injuring both children, Goodwin doused them and multiple areas of the apartment with lighter fluid. She had in the hours or days before taken deliberate steps to suppress the apartment's fire safety systems, covering smoke detectors, sprinkler heads, and ventilation vents in nearly every room with rags and duct tape. She set fire in 4 separate locations within the apartment. She then removed the interior doorknob from Jamal's bedroom, ensuring that he could not open the door to escape. Salem. Firefighter Richard Arno responded to the scene and was briefly trapped inside the burning apartment. His experience that night would stay with him permanently. Jamal, critically wounded and surrounded by fire, did not surrender. He found a bowl of water his mother used for floor washing and attempted to extinguish the flames himself. He did not want to die. Tanisha Goodwin left the apartment with 3-year-old Erica and made her way to Salem Police Headquarters, where she smashed a display case in the lobby and
collapsed.
She said repeatedly, according to witnesses, "I'm sorry, babies. I'm sorry, babies. I did what I had to do to protect my children." Both Jamal and Erica were rushed to Children's Hospital in Boston in critical condition. Both survived due entirely to the speed, skill, and determination of first responders and medical professionals who refused to give up on them. Their physical injuries over time healed. Their emotional and psychological recovery would be a far longer journey. Tanisha Goodwin was charged with 2 counts of armed assault with intent to cause severe harm, as well as multiple counts related to arson and child endangerment. Her defense team presented extensive documentation of her mental health history and argued that she had been suffering from a severe psychotic episode at the time of the attacks. In January of 2015, Goodwin entered a guilty plea in Salem Superior Court to what prosecutor Melissa Woodard described as what amounted to a double attempted homicide with a staged self-harm attempt. She was sentenced by Judge James F. Lang to 20 to 25 years in state prison. District Attorney Jonathan Blahet stated, "While there is no amount of prison time sufficient to punish this heinous crime, I commend the assistant district attorneys for finding an acceptable resolution for this case that spares the young victims the additional trauma of having to testify against their mother." Goodwin was permanently barred from any contact with Jamal, Erica, or their respective fathers. Jamal was adopted by his mother's cousin, Wayne Cox, the same family member who had once cared for Tanisha herself. Erica went to live with her biological father. Both children were given the opportunity to grow up in safe, stable, and loving environments. The case of Tanisha Goodwin is inseparable from the conversation about serious mental illness and the profound gaps that continue to exist in community mental health services. 4 separate complaints about abuse and neglect had been filed with the Massachusetts Department of Children and Families regarding Goodwin's home. Social workers had been involved. Help had been offered, and still the night of March 18th arrived. Jamal and Erica Goodwin survived. That is the most important sentence in this entire case. They survived, and they grew up. If you are a parent, a neighbor, a teacher, or a social worker who suspects a family is in crisis, please contact the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-422-4453. Your call could be the intervention that changes everything. Please like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Time. We are grateful for every member of this community. The next case shocked an entire state and reopened urgent questions about pediatric psychiatry, prescription medication, and the dangers of diagnosing very young children with complex mental health conditions. Case 7, Carolyn Riley, December 13, 2006, Weymouth and Hull, Massachusetts. The case of Rebecca Riley begins not with a night of sudden crisis, but with years of prescriptions, of appointments of a family that navigated the social services system while standing in plain sight of the agencies that were supposed to protect the children inside their home. Rebecca Riley was born in 2002, the youngest child of Carolyn and Michael Riley, who were living at the time in public housing in Weymouth, Massachusetts. Her older siblings, Caitlin and Gerard, had both previously been seen by a child psychiatrist named Dr. Kyoko Kafuji. The Riley family had sought evaluations for their children, citing behavioral difficulties, and Dr. Kuji had diagnosed both older siblings with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and bipolar disorder, prescribing them psychotropic medications. When Rebecca was approximately 2 years old, the same process began for her. By the time Rebecca Riley was 3 years old, she had been diagnosed by Dr. Kafuji with bipolar disorder and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Diagnosis that struck many in the medical community as extraordinary for a child of that age. She was prescribed a combination of medications including clonidine, Depaote, and Seroquel. These are powerful pharmaceutical compounds used in adult psychiatric care. Their use in children, particularly very young children, was at the time and has remained since a subject of significant medical debate. Prosecutors argued that Carolyn and Michael Riley had actively manipulated Rebecca's psychiatric care. They alleged that the couple described exaggerated symptoms to Dr. Coogee in order to secure diagnosis and accompanying prescriptions. Diagnosis that made their children eligible for Social Security disability benefits, which the family relied upon. They further alleged that the Rileys used those prescriptions not therapeutically, but as a mechanism of control, administering the medications in quantities that kept the children sedated, quiet, and manageable. In October of 2005, there was already a significant warning sign. Carolyn Riley told Dr. Coogee that she had increased Rebecca's nightly dose of clonidine on her own without medical authorization to help the child sleep. Dr. Coogee was alarmed. She explained that such an increase could have fatal consequences and told Carolyn explicitly not to make any further unauthorized adjustments. This warning was documented. It was part of the medical record. By November of 2006, staff at Rebecca's preschool had grown sufficiently concerned about the degree of medication the child appeared to be receiving that they contacted Dr. Coogee directly. Plans were made to reduce the dosage. Caroline was reportedly agitated upon learning of the school's call. There were additional warning signs in the days that followed. Family, friends, and relatives who visited the household and expressed concern, even pleading with Carolyn to take Rebecca to see a doctor as the child's condition visibly worsened. Rebecca Riley took her last breath on December 13, 2006. She was 4 years old. The medical examiner determined that Rebecca died from an acute intoxication of psychotropic medications, specifically a lethal concentration of clonid in her system. Investigators found evidence that she had been given her regular medications plus additional doses of cough medicine and clonidine on the night before her death. The combination was fatal. Carolyn and Michael Riley were both indicted by a Plymouth County grand jury in 2007. They were tried separately in 2010. Carolyn Riley was convicted of murder in the second degree. Michael Riley was convicted of murder in the first degree under the theory of extreme atrocity and cruelty. The cases prompted a searching examination of the Massachusetts Department of Social Services, which had been involved with the Riley family, had received reports of concern and had failed to remove the children from the household. It also sparked a broader national conversation about the psychiatric medication of very young children, the reliability of diagnosis in early childhood, and the responsibilities of medical professionals when they suspect that a parent's description of symptoms may not be honest. Dr. Coogee, who received immunity in exchange for her cooperation, testified that she had made her diagnostic and prescribing decisions entirely based on what Carolyn Riley told her about the children's behavior. She acknowledged that she had never independently verified the accounts. Her medical license was temporarily suspended by the Massachusetts Board of Registration and Medicine, though it was later reinstated. Carolyn Riley appealed her conviction. The appeal was denied on September 20, 2013. Michael Riley's appeal was denied on April 15, 2014. Both convictions stand. Rebecca Riley never had the chance to ask a question, draw a picture, or run across a school playground. She was 4 years old. She was given adult psychiatric medication in amounts that her small body could not survive. And the people who were supposed to protect her, as well as the systems that were alerted to her danger, did not act in time. Her case changed prescription protocols in Massachusetts and contributed to national discussions about pediatric mental health diagnosis guidelines. That is her legacy. An unasked-for legacy carried by a little girl who should have been playing, not testifying through her absence. If you found this story important, please like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Time. It helps us reach more people who need to hear these stories. The next case is deeply disturbing in a different way. A calculated act of violence against an innocent victim whose only connection to the perpetrator was the terrible misfortune of living nearby. Case 8, Julie Corey. July of 2009, Worcester, Massachusetts. In July of 2009, the city of Worcester, Massachusetts was confronted with a case so deeply disturbing that even seasoned investigators struggled to find the language to describe it. It was a case that began with one woman's desperate grief and ended with the violent destruction of another woman's life and with an infant pulled from circumstances that no child should ever enter the world through. Julie Corey was 35 years old in the summer of 2009. She had suffered a miscarriage approximately 3 months before the events that would define the rest of her life. The loss had been devastating to her. According to evidence presented at trial, she had begun telling people, including her boyfriend, Alex Dion, that she was pregnant again. She had maintained that claim into the weeks that followed, even as no pregnancy existed. Darlene Haynes was 23 years old and 8 months pregnant. She was a mother of 3. She lived in the same apartment building as Corey at 94 Southgate Street in Worcester. By all accounts, she and Corey knew each other. They were neighbors in the most ordinary sense of the word. People who shared a building, shared hallways, perhaps exchanged greetings at the mailbox. Darlene Haynes had no reason to fear the woman who lived nearby. On July 27, 2009, Darlene Haynes was found by her landlord. Her body was discovered in a closet in her apartment wrapped in bedding. She had been subjected to severe physical harm consistent with strangulation. Her unborn child, 8 months developed, viable, alive, had been removed from her womb. The baby girl survived. Julie Corey was located the following day at a homeless shelter in Plymouth, New Hampshire, approximately 40 miles north of Concord with her boyfriend, Alex Dion, and the infant girl. She had told Dion and others that the baby was hers, born prematurely following complications. Friends who heard her story and then saw news reports about a pregnant neighbor found dead in Worcester became suspicious. They called police. Officers arrived at the shelter as Corey was attempting to leave with the infant. She was arrested. The baby, whom Darlene Haynes had planned to name Sheila Marie, was healthy. She was taken into protective custody and ultimately placed with family members of Darlene Haynes. Darlene's uncle, Carl Whitney, told reporters at the time that he was grateful at the very least that the child was alive. She kept the baby alive. He said, "If she hadn't, we'd probably all be looking at far more different circumstances." It was a complicated, painful grace, the fact that in the midst of an act of such profound violence, the infant had been kept from further harm. The investigation built a clear picture of premeditation. Corey had suffered a miscarriage. She had constructed a false pregnancy to maintain the appearance of expecting a child. She had then, according to prosecutors, targeted Darlene Haynes specifically, a neighbor who was visibly pregnant, who was vulnerable, and who was known to her. The act was not impulsive. It was planned. Julie Corey did not testify at her trial. Her defense offered no witnesses. The case went to the jury on February 12, 2014 in Worcester Superior Court. The jury deliberated briefly before returning a verdict of guilty of first-degree murder. Corey was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Darlene Haynes was 23 years old. She had 3 older children who loved her. She was 8 months from welcoming a daughter she had already named. She was a neighbor, a mother, a young woman with her entire life ahead of her. She deserved to bring her daughter into the world on her own terms, in her own time, surrounded by the people who loved her. The daughter she named Sheila Marie grew up. That matters. It does not undo what was taken, but it matters. Please like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Time. Every case we cover is a reminder that justice requires witnesses, and that means you. The next case takes us back in time to the 1980s, to a modern-day care center, and to one of the most controversial and landmark legal cases in the history of Massachusetts. Case 9. Violet Amarault, 1984 through 1987, Malden, Massachusetts. To fully understand Case 9, you have to understand the America of the early 1980s, a nation in the grip of a new and powerful anxiety. The decade had brought with it a dramatic expansion of women entering the workforce. And with that expansion had come an equally dramatic growth in child care facilities across the country. Daycare centers were opening in neighborhoods and churches and strip malls from coast to coast. And with their rapid proliferation came a fear that grew quietly at first and then exploded into one of the most intense moral panics in modern American history. Cases of alleged child sexual abuse at daycare centers began appearing in newspapers from California to New York. The McMartin preschool case in Manhattan Beach, California, had become national news by 1984. Dozens of similar cases would follow. They shared common elements. Young children describing abuse by trusted adult caregivers. Interviews conducted using methods that later generations of psychologists would call deeply problematic, and communities shattered by the collision between the desire to protect children and the risk of convicting innocent people. It was into this national atmosphere that the Fells Acres Day School case erupted. Fells Acres Day School was located in Malden, Massachusetts, a city just north of Boston. It had been founded in 1966 by Violet Emerald, who was then in her early 40s. Over the following 18 years, approximately 3,000 children passed through the school. Violet had built something real and lasting, a community institution staffed in part by her own family. Her son Gerald worked at the school as a bus driver, cook, and assistant director. Her daughter, Cheryl Amaral Lefebvre, taught one of the school's classes. On September 2, 1984, the mother of a 5-year-old boy who attended Fells's Acres contacted a state child abuse hotline. She said her son had disclosed something troubling to her, that a man at the school whom the children called Tookie had done something inappropriate to him. Tookie was Gerald Amaralt. Gerald Amaralt was arrested on September 5, 1984. The daycare center was shut down 1 week later. In the weeks that followed, investigators held a meeting at the Malden police station for parents of children who had attended the school. At that meeting, parents were told about the symptoms of sexual abuse and were given specific prompts, including questions about a magic room, a secret room, and a clown to use when speaking to their children. The children's responses, shaped in part by this prompting, would form the evidentiary foundation of multiple criminal trials. Children testified to a range of events that were, in the retrospective assessment of psychologists and legal scholars, extraordinary and internally inconsistent. They described being taken to a magic room described as a bathroom with a child-sized door. They described a clown, a magic wand, an axe that seemed designed to press every alarm button in the cultural consciousness of 1980 for America. The interviews that produced these accounts were conducted without the safeguards that modern child psychology mandates, without blind interviewers, without neutrality, without recording protocols designed to prevent suggestion. Research conducted years later at institutions including McGill University demonstrated that the kind of prolonged, repeated questioning used with these children frequently produced accounts that reflected the expectations of the interviewer rather than the actual experience of the child. Gerald Amaralt was tried in 1986. After 64.5 hours of jury deliberation, he was found guilty on 15 counts of assault and rape involving 9 children. He was sentenced to 30 to 40 years in state prison. In May of 1987, Violet Amaralt and Cheryl Amaralt Leave were tried together in a separate proceeding for children testified against them. On June 13, 1987, both women were found guilty on all counts. On July 15, they were each sentenced to 8 to 20 years in state prison. The years that followed were characterized by legal appeals, growing medical and psychological criticism of the original evidence, and an increasingly vocal community of legal scholars, journalists, and experts who argued that the Amaralts had been convicted in an atmosphere of hysteria rather than on the basis of credible evidence. Dorothy Rabinowitz of the Wall Street Journal wrote extensively about the case and was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for commentary in 2001 in part for her coverage. In August of 1995, after serving 8 years in state prison, Violet Emerald and her daughter Cheryl were freed on appeal when a Superior Court judge ruled that their convictions were invalid because the children had testified without being required to face the defendants. The Commonwealth appealed, and in 1993, while that appeal was still pending, the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court had reversed the original order reducing the sentences. Violet Amaralt, freed in 1995, did not live to see her name cleared. She passed away in September of 1997 with her convictions still technically unresolved. She was 74 years old. Cheryl Amaral Lefebvre reached an agreement with the District Attorney's Office in October of 1999, under which her reinstituted conviction was acknowledged in exchange for her not being returned to prison. She served 10 years of probation. Gerald Amaralt was paroled in 2004 after spending 18 years in prison. As of the time of this documentary, he remains on the sex offender registry. His ankle monitor was still active decades after the original charges. In November of 2022, Governor Charlie Baker recommended formal pardons for both Gerald Amaralt and Cheryl Amaralt-Leff. Baker stated publicly that he held grave doubt regarding the evidentiary strength of the convictions, noting that the investigation had taken place before modern scientific protocols for interviewing children were in place. The investigations and prosecutions of the Amaralts in the 1980s took place without the benefit of scientific studies that have in the intervening years led to widespread adoption of investigative protocols designed to protect objectivity and reliability. Baker said the Felsakers case remains one of the most studied, most debated, and most contested criminal cases in Massachusetts history. It is simultaneously a case about the failure to protect vulnerable children because children did testify, did describe distress, did exhibit behavioral symptoms, and a case about the catastrophic consequences of a legal system that allowed fear and suggestion to override evidence and due process. What we can say with confidence is this: the children at the center of this case were real. Their distress was real, and the impact on their families was real and lasting. Whatever the ultimate truth of what occurred at Felsakers Day School, those children carried the weight of this case for the rest of their lives. And the Amaralt family carried a different, but equally heavy weight. The lessons of the Felsakers case have directly shaped the way child testimony is gathered and evaluated in American courts today. The protocols, now standard in child forensic interviews, including neutral interviewers, recorded sessions, open-ended questioning, and the avoidance of suggestion, are in no small part a response to cases like this one. Please like this video and subscribe to Cold Case Time. You have made it through 9 deeply powerful, deeply important cases, and we are grateful for every single one of you who has stayed with us. Now, the final case of today's documentary. It is the most recent case on this list. It happened not in a city, but on an island. It involved not a stranger, but someone the family had trusted for years. And when the surveillance footage told the truth that words had hidden, a quiet community on Martha's Vineyard was left forever changed. Case 10. Amy Cotton, March 13, 2025. Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts. Martha's Vineyard is an island located approximately 7 miles off the coast of Cape Cod in Massachusetts. It is known for its natural beauty, its tight-knit communities, its summer visitors, and the kind of year-round island life that builds deep trust among neighbors. It is the kind of place where people leave their doors unlocked, where children walk freely, and where the network of relationships that sustains daily life is built on a foundation of mutual reliance. On Martha's Vineyard, your neighbor is not just the person next door. Your neighbor is often the person you trust to watch your child. The Rodenba family was one of those families. Matt and Julie Rodenba lived on the vineyard with their children, including 2-year-old Frank Edward Rodenba, a little boy described by his father as a mini-me, a ball of energy, who heard his father's car in the driveway and raced to the gate every evening shouting dead before leaping into his arms. Frankie was the kind of child that people noticed, vivid, warm, and luminously alive. For his care during the day, the Rodenbos relied on Amy Cotton, a 40-year-old woman from Oak Bluffs, a town on the northeastern edge of the island. Cotton was not a stranger, hired from an agency. She was someone the family had known for more than 10 years. She had cared for the Rodenba's older daughter from infancy through the first 3 years of her life. She came highly recommended within the community. She was trusted. She had been caring for Frankie since he was 4 months old. On the morning of March 13, 2025, Amy Cotton picked Frankie up from his mother at approximately 7:40 in the morning. She dropped her own children at Oak Bluffs Elementary School and returned to her home on Great Rock Road, arriving at approximately 9:20 in the morning. She also had in her care that day a 1-year-old girl from a separate family. What happened in the hours that followed is documented in detail, not primarily by witness accounts, but by the Nest security camera installed on the exterior of Cotton's home, which captured a record of events that would eventually contradict almost everything Cotton initially told investigators. According to that surveillance footage, after returning home at 9:20 in the morning, Amy Cotton exited her vehicle and went inside her house. Both children, Frankie and the 1-year-old girl, remained in the vehicle, strapped into their car seats. Over the course of the approximately 3 hours that followed, Cotton was observed coming and going from her home. But at no point, according to the footage, did she return to the vehicle to check on, feed, comfort, or remove either child. At approximately 12:15 in the afternoon, she took the baby girl inside for a brief period of approximately 10 minutes, before returning her to the vehicle. At 1:15 in the afternoon, Cotton was seen opening the rear passenger door of the car. Emergency services arrived within minutes. Cotton called 911 at approximately 1:15. She reported that the child she was babysitting was not breathing and had turned blue. When officers and paramedics arrived, they found Frankie Rodenba unresponsive in his car seat. He was taken by ambulance to Martha's Vineyard Hospital and then airlifted by medical helicopter to Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston, where he was admitted to intensive care. Medical examination determined that Frankie had developed hypothermia, a dangerous and potentially fatal drop in core body temperature during the time he had been left in the vehicle. He had no underlying health conditions. He had been a healthy child. He had been unresponsive to the elements while strapped in a car seat, unable to move, unable to call for help, unable to do anything but wait. On March 19, 2025, after 5 days in intensive care at Massachusetts General Hospital, Frankie Rodenba passed away. He was 2 years old. The following day, March 20th, Amy Cotton was arraigned on an elevated charge of manslaughter in Edgerton District Court. She pleaded not guilty. When investigators confronted Cotton with the security footage and the discrepancies between her account and what the camera showed, she acknowledged that the children had been left in the vehicle for the entire approximately 3-hour period. She stated that during that time, she had been inside her home, cooking bacon in the oven, conducting personal hygiene, preparing her son's hockey equipment, and carrying out household chores. Police wrote in their report that she had been remorseful at times, but attempted to justify her actions throughout the interview. What made the revelation even more chilling was a detail that Cotton herself disclosed. She allegedly told investigators that this was not the first time she had left children unsupervised in the vehicle for an extended period. She said it had happened on 5 previous occasions. She claimed she believed she could see the vehicle from inside the house through a window. The response from Frankie's father was immediate, raw, and devastating. Matt Rodenba told CBS Boston's IT team, "She tortured my child." He described how investigators had enhanced the audio from the security footage and been able to hear Frankie calling out from inside the vehicle. "He can be heard calling out for data," Rodenba said over and over and over again until the video went silent. In September of 2025, a Dukes County grand jury returned indictments against Amy Cotton on charges of manslaughter and reckless endangerment of a child. Her case was moved to Dukes County Superior Court. On October 7, 2025, Cotton was arraigned in Superior Court, entered a not guilty plea, and was released on bail of $23,800 with conditions including a GPS monitoring device and no contact with the Rodenba family. A pretrial conference was scheduled for February of 2026. As of the time of this documentary, Amy Cotton has not been tried. She is presumed innocent under the law until and unless a jury determines otherwise. The case against her will proceed through the Massachusetts court system, and the Rodenba family has made clear they intend to be present for every step of that process. In the aftermath of Frankie's passing, the Rodenba family channeled their grief into purpose. They raised more than $270,000 for a new preschool playground at the Oak Bluff School, where Frankie's mother teaches. The playground, a living memorial to a little boy who loved to run and climb and laugh, was opened in the year that followed his passing. Matt Rodenbaugh has spoken publicly about his hope that Frankie's story will lead other parents to ask more questions, to check in unexpectedly, to trust but verify. "I think trust but verify is a big one," he told CBS Boston. "Ask questions, pop in, stop by, see if they'd be okay with a camera. It's not to spy on them. It's to make sure your child is safe." The case of Amy Cotton is at its core a case about the gap between trust and accountability. It is a case about what happens when the people we rely on most are not who we believe them to be. It is a case about a little boy who called out for his father and could not be heard. And it is a case that the Martha's Vineyard community, an island whose identity is built on togetherness, will carry with it for a very long time. Frankie Rodenba was 2 years old. He had a smile that could fill a room and a voice that could reach his father from the driveway. He deserved to grow up on that island, to go to the Oak Bluff School, and to play on that playground that his family built in his name. For parents and caregivers seeking resources on child safety, the Safe Kids Worldwide organization offers free guidance on vehicle safety, child supervision standards, and caregiver vetting tools. Visit safekids.org for information. No parent should ever have to go through what the Rodenba family has endured. Thank you for watching this documentary.
With Cold Case Time.
Every case covered in this video represents a real family, a real child, and a real community that was forever altered by events that should never have occurred. True crime documentaries like this one exist not to sensationalize suffering, but to bear witness, to say out loud and on the record that these children mattered, that their stories matter, and that justice, however imperfect, matters. We encourage everyone watching to stay informed, to support child welfare organizations in your communities, and to check on the families around you. Sometimes the most important thing any of us can do is simply pay attention. If this documentary reached you today, please give this video a like, leave a comment below telling us which case you believe deserves more public awareness, and subscribe to Cold Case Time so you never miss another story. Hit that notification bell so we can keep bringing these important cases directly to you. Your support keeps this channel alive and keeps these voices from being forgotten. This is Cold Case Time. We will see you in the next.